"Don't interfere. I'm marrying someone else," the Millionaire CEO said. 5 years later, karma made him fall to his knees. Lincoln Rolfson stepped outside, his suit still sharp, his posture still disciplined, yet something inside him had shifted. Minutes earlier, a presentation meant to secure his company's future had collapsed in front of investors who once admired him. The city lights blurred across wet pavement while he stood motionless, as though the noise of Ashford had faded away. "Mr. Rolfson, any comments about the deal?" He didn't answer. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from a weight he could no longer ignore. For years he had controlled every outcome, every conversation. Tonight, control slipped through his fingers like rainwater. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "When did everything start feeling empty?" For the first time, Lincoln lowered his head, shoulders no longer carrying the same certainty. The city moved around him, uncaring, while he stood still, a man surrounded by success yet unable to hold on to peace. Hours earlier, cameras flashed at a gala celebrating his achievements. Guests praised his discipline, his intelligence, his ability to stay calm under pressure. He had smiled politely, offering brief responses that sounded perfect but felt distant even to him. Inside his penthouse later that night, silence filled the rooms where celebration should have lingered. Awards lined a polished shelf, reflecting the skyline through wide windows. He loosened his tie and stared at his own reflection. "You built everything you said you would," he murmured. "So why does it feel like something's missing?" His phone buzzed with congratulations, yet none of the messages felt personal. He placed the device face down, letting the room fall quiet again. Success had given him influence, recognition, and a place among powerful names, but it had also built walls he never noticed until now. A faint memory stirred, something softer than boardrooms and headlines, but he pushed it aside at first, unwilling to let the past disrupt the image he worked so hard to maintain. There's a moment many people face but rarely admit aloud, the moment when ambition begins to compete with connection. Lincoln had always believed that moving forward required sacrifice, yet he never asked what those sacrifices might cost later. Have you ever chosen a path that looked perfect from the outside while quietly wondering what you left behind? Have you ever convinced yourself that feelings could wait until after success arrived? Lincoln once told someone, "Time is a resource. You either use it or lose it." Back then, he believed every decision could be measured in progress, but he realized progress without meaning feels strangely hollow. The city lights reflected in puddles around his shoes, and he closed his eyes briefly, as if searching for an answer he avoided for years. Without warning, another voice echoed in his mind, his own voice from years ago. "Don't interfere. I'm marrying someone else." The words replayed with unsettling clarity. He remembered a small cafe, a gray sky pressing low over the streets, and a woman standing across from him with a calm expression that hid more strength than he understood at the time. She had answered gently, "Then I hope she makes you happy." He never looked back when he walked away that afternoon. At the time, he believed he had chosen the future he needed: stability, influence, momentum. Now that same memory returned not as regret alone, but as a question he could no longer silence. Who had he been before that moment, and who might he have become if he had stayed? That single afternoon did more than end a relationship, it redirected two lives completely. Lincoln moved deeper into a world of investors, strategies, and expectations. The woman he left behind built something of her own, quietly, steadily, without needing anyone's approval. He didn't know yet that their paths would cross again under circumstances neither of them expected. He finally admitted something he had avoided saying aloud. "I thought success would make everything clear," he whispered. "Instead, it made me forget what mattered." Far away, someone else in the city continued building a life shaped by resilience rather than recognition. Their stories had separated years earlier, but time has a way of bringing unfinished chapters back into focus. And tonight, the night everything began to change, Lincoln felt the first pull of that unfinished chapter. 5 years earlier, Lincoln Rolfson wasn't standing outside a corporate tower. He was sitting by a bookstore window, reading while soft music played in the background. The pace of his life felt slower then, guided more by curiosity than by pressure. He didn't know that a simple conversation would shift his perspective. He didn't know that laughter shared between shelves of novels would become one of the few memories that stayed warm even after years passed. The sound of pages turning, a gentle voice offering coffee, and a version of himself who hadn't yet learned how heavy ambition could become. Maybe everything started there, he thought quietly. And with that thought, the present moment gave way to memory. Before we step into that earlier chapter, pause for a second and think about this. Have you ever met someone who changed the way you saw your own life, only to realize it much later? If stories about growth, second chances, and choices that come back around speak to you, stay with me and make sure you're part of this journey. Your support through likes, comments, and subscribing helps bring more stories like this to life. Because this isn't only about a powerful CEO, it's about how a single decision can echo across years, reshaping who we become and what we value. And to understand how Lincoln reached this night, we have to return to the beginning. 5 years earlier, morning arrived quietly over Ashford, turning rows of glass towers into mirrors that caught the first light. Traffic flowed beneath elevated walkways while cafe doors opened for early customers who moved with purpose. From the upper floor of Rolfson Global's headquarters, the skyline looked almost peaceful, distant enough to feel controlled, close enough to remind everyone that time never paused. Lincoln stood near the window of his office, a cup of black coffee resting untouched beside him. He watched the sun climb higher, the reflection cutting across his suit like a clean line dividing night from day. Assistants arrived early, preparing schedules, reviewing messages, and ensuring every meeting began on time. The company ran with the precision he demanded. His assistant stepped inside carefully. "Your calendar is full until evening, Mr. Rolfson." He nodded once. "Move the investor call 15 minutes earlier. I don't want delays." Outside, the city carried on without hesitation, and Lincoln matched that rhythm, measured, composed, and always several steps ahead. His routine rarely changed. A morning workout before sunrise, strategic briefings over coffee, then hours of negotiations that required focus rather than emotion. Colleagues admired how calm he appeared, even when discussions grew intense. He listened more than he spoke, choosing words carefully as though every sentence carried weight. During a boardroom meeting, a junior executive hesitated while presenting new projections. Lincoln noticed immediately. The room settled. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Authority came from quiet certainty rather than pressure. Afterward, one of the directors commented, "You make leadership look effortless." Lincoln offered a polite smile. Effortless isn't the right word, just practiced. He kept conversations brief, avoiding personal details. To many he seemed untouchable, a man shaped by discipline alone. Yet the steadiness that impressed others also created distance, leaving little space for anything unpredictable. Later that evening, Lincoln arrived at a private dinner with his wife, Kayla Walsh. The restaurant overlooked the river, soft music filling the background, while business leaders spoke in low voices around them. From the outside, they appeared perfectly matched, elegant, composed, and aligned with the expectations of their world. Kayla adjusted her bracelet while reviewing messages on her phone. "The charity board wants you at next week's event," she said. "It's important for visibility." "I'll be there," Lincoln replied, scanning a document she had passed across the table. Their conversations often centered on schedules, partnerships, or future plans rather than personal thoughts. A brief silence followed. Neither seemed uncomfortable, yet neither reached for deeper connection. When the waiter refilled their glasses, Kayla added, "We're doing well. Everything is exactly where it should be." Lincoln nodded, though something in her words felt more like a report than a feeling. They shared goals, respect, and public admiration, but warmth rarely entered the space between them. At a corporate reception later that week, Lincoln stood beneath bright chandeliers as guests approached him with congratulations. Cameras flashed, conversations overlapped, and compliments arrived one after another. "Your latest expansion is impressive," one investor said. "You've built something remarkable," another added. Lincoln thanked them politely, answering questions with calm confidence. To anyone watching, he appeared completely fulfilled, a leader surrounded by opportunity and praise. Yet when the music softened and the crowd shifted toward the dance floor, he stepped aside near a balcony. From there he could hear laughter drifting through the room, distant enough to feel separate from him. Kayla joined a group discussing upcoming projects, her voice confident and clear. Lincoln watched quietly for a moment before turning his attention back to the skyline. He rarely allowed himself to linger on emotions during events, but the contrast between public celebration and private quietness felt sharper that night. For a brief second he wondered what it would feel like to attend a gathering without thinking about reputation or expectations. Near the end of the evening, 2 guests stood behind him, unaware he could hear them. "He has everything," one whispered softly. "But have you ever seen him truly smile?" The other paused before replying. "Maybe people at that level don't need to." Lincoln didn't react outwardly. He simply adjusted his cuff and stepped forward to greet another colleague. Still, the comment followed him long after the conversation ended. On the drive home, city lights blurred through the car window. He replayed the words in his mind, unsure why they mattered so much. Had he changed that much? Or had he always been this reserved? When he entered the penthouse later that night, silence greeted him again. He set his keys down slowly, the echo of the gala fading behind him. Standing near the window, Lincoln loosened his tie and watched reflections shift across the glass. Something about the evening, the whispers, the applause, the controlled conversations, stirred a memory he hadn't allowed himself to revisit in years. He closed his eyes briefly, and instead of hearing music from the gala, he remembered softer sounds, pages turning, low laughter, the faint clink of a coffee cup placed beside him without a word. A voice from the past seemed to linger just beyond reach. "You always look like you're thinking 10 years ahead," she had once said playfully. He exhaled slowly, surprised at how clear the memory felt. For a moment, the polished world he lived in faded, replaced by a simpler version of himself who sat by a bookstore window with no headlines waiting for him. Lincoln opened his eyes again, staring out at the waking city. The sun had fully risen now, casting long reflections across the buildings, and with it came the quiet realization that success had not erased the past. It had only buried it. And as that memory grew stronger, the story began to pull him, and us, toward a time when everything felt slower, warmer, and far less certain. 5 years earlier, long before magazine covers and crowded galas, Lincoln Rolfson pushed open the door of a small neighborhood bookstore tucked between a bakery and a flower shop. A soft bell chimed above him, welcoming him into a space that felt slower than the rest of Ashford. Shelves curved gently along the walls, filled with novels, biographies, and journals stacked with care. He moved toward a window seat near the back, setting down a notebook beside a thick business biography. Shaney Whitting stood on a small ladder nearby, rearranging books with quiet focus. She noticed him only after he had settled in for nearly an hour, turning pages with steady concentration. "You always pick the same corner," she said casually, stepping down from the ladder. Lincoln looked up, slightly surprised she had been watching long enough to notice a pattern. "It's quieter here," he replied. She smiled faintly. "That's usually why people come to bookstores." Their conversation ended there at first, simple, unforced. Yet something about the ease of that brief exchange lingered in the air, like a beginning neither of them rushed to define. Over the next few evenings, Lincoln returned to the same spot. Sometimes he read in silence, sometimes he scribbled ideas into his notebook. Shaney moved around the store, helping customers, recommending titles, and occasionally glancing toward him when she thought he wouldn't notice. One night she stopped beside his table again. "You read a lot about leadership," she observed, tilting her head slightly. "Do you ever read fiction?" He closed the book slowly. "I like learning from real stories. Fiction tells real stories too," she replied, just from a different angle. That comment made him pause. Most people he spoke with in his professional world focused on numbers and strategies, not perspective. He found himself asking questions he normally avoided outside business settings. "What would you recommend then?" he asked. She picked a novel from a nearby shelf and placed it gently beside his notebook. "Something that makes you think about people instead of outcomes." He considered her suggestion longer than he expected, curiosity replacing the routine focus he carried everywhere else. The evening grew quieter as customers left, leaving only soft music and the occasional rustle of pages. Without a word, Shaney returned a few minutes later and set a warm cup of coffee beside him. "You've been here 3 nights straight," she said lightly. "I figured you might need this." Lincoln looked at the cup, then at her. "I didn't order anything." "It's on the house," she replied with a small shrug. "Call it a thank you for keeping the business section alive." He allowed himself a faint laugh, a rare sound even to his own ears. "I didn't realize I was contributing that much." "Well," she added, leaning slightly against the table, "you make the place feel focused." Her tone wasn't flattering, it was simply honest. That honesty caught him off guard. Most people approached him with expectations or careful politeness. She spoke as though titles and achievements didn't matter here. He lifted the cup, the warmth grounding him in a way he hadn't felt in months. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't mention it," she replied, already turning back toward the shelves. Days turned into weeks, and their conversations stretched longer each time. What began as brief exchanges about books grew into discussions about ideas, creativity, purpose, and what success meant beyond numbers. "I want to design spaces that tell stories," Shaney said one evening, while arranging a display of art books. "Not just things people look at, but places that make them feel something." Lincoln rested his elbow on the table, listening more than he spoke. "Most people chase stability," he said. "You sound like you're chasing meaning." She shrugged gently. "Why can't you have both?" That question stayed with him long after he left the store that night. In his world, ambition often meant moving faster, thinking further ahead, planning years into the future. Yet with her, conversations felt different, grounded in the present instead of distant goals. "You talk about companies like they're living things," she told him during another late evening. "They are," he replied. "Every decision shapes what they become." "And people?" she asked softly. He hesitated before answering. "People shape us more than we expect." The word surprised even him. Eventually, their conversations moved beyond the bookstore. After closing one night, they walked along the river that cut through Ashford's quieter district. Streetlights reflected on the water while distant music drifted from nearby cafes. They spoke about small things, favorite childhood memories, places they wanted to travel, the strange way time seemed to move faster as life grew busier. The ease between them didn't rely on grand gestures. Instead, it lived in shared glances and quiet laughter that felt natural rather than forced. At one point, Shaney stopped near the railing, watching boats pass slowly beneath a bridge. "You're different outside." "Work," she said. Lincoln raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Less guarded," she replied, searching for the right word. "Like you're not always calculating your next step." He considered that for a moment. With colleagues, every word carried purpose. With her, silence felt comfortable enough to fill the space between sentences. They began walking again, steps matching without effort. The connection grew steadily, never dramatic. Just two people learning each other through time spent side by side. One evening beneath soft city lights, Lincoln reached for her hand almost without thinking. The gesture felt natural, unforced, as though it had been waiting for the right moment. "You make everything slower," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. Shaney glanced at him, curious. "That sounds like a complaint." "It isn't," he said quickly, meeting her gaze. "It's the only time I stop running." The honesty lingered between them. He wasn't used to speaking that way, not without rehearsing his words. Yet around her, the need for control faded just enough for truth to surface. She smiled gently. "Maybe you don't always have to run." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the river flow past, feeling something unfamiliar settle inside him. Not excitement, not ambition, but calm. Their connection never relied on dramatic promises. It grew through shared routines, evenings at the bookstore, conversations over coffee, walks that stretched longer than either planned. Lincoln began to notice small changes in himself. He listened more, spoke more openly, and allowed silence without feeling the need to fill it with strategy. One afternoon, while helping rearrange shelves, he asked, "Do you ever worry about the future?" Shaney paused, considering. "Of course, but I try not to let it steal today." Her words stayed with him long after. For someone who constantly planned years ahead, the idea of simply noticing the present felt almost unfamiliar. As weeks passed, the bookstore became more than a place to read. It became a space where Lincoln allowed himself to be human instead of only successful. And though neither of them knew what challenges would come, those quiet moments laid the emotional foundation that would follow them through every decision ahead. Because long before the cafe goodbye, long before headlines and distance, there was a season when connection felt easy, and neither of them realized how deeply those simple evenings would matter later. The shift started quietly at first. Lincoln's startup, once a small idea sketched inside notebooks at the bookstore, began gaining traction beyond Ashford. Articles appeared online praising his strategic thinking, and invitations to exclusive meetings followed soon after. Investors who once ignored early proposals suddenly requested private presentations. One afternoon, he stood at the front of a sleek conference room, outlining expansion plans to a group of executives who listened with focused interest. "You're not thinking small," one investor noted, folding his hands thoughtfully. "I never planned to," Lincoln replied. The room carried a different energy from the bookstore, sharper, faster, filled with expectation. Each question pushed him further into a world where every decision held financial weight. When the meeting ended, several investors stayed behind, eager to continue discussions. Outside the building, Lincoln checked his phone and noticed a message from Shaney. "Are you still coming by tonight? I saved that novel you were curious about." He hesitated before replying. Running late, it felt like a small compromise, necessary, temporary. At least that's what he told himself as he slipped the phone back into his pocket. Among the investors who showed interest, one name stood out more than the rest: Theo Walsh. Known across Ashford for his calculated business decisions, Theo rarely backed projects unless he believed they could reshape industries. His office reflected the same precision, minimalist design, large windows overlooking the financial district, and a silence that felt intentional. "You're disciplined," he said after reviewing the proposal. "That's rare at your stage." Theo watched Lincoln carefully during their first private meeting. "I focus on long-term structure," Lincoln replied. Theo nodded. "Structure is good, but influence matters more. The right circles open doors faster than talent alone." The conversation shifted beyond numbers, touching on reputation, visibility, and connections that extended far beyond Lincoln's current world. Theo's presence carried authority without needing to raise his voice. As the meeting ended, Theo added casually, "I'd like you to attend a private dinner this weekend. Consider it an introduction to people who can help you grow faster." Lincoln agreed, sensing that this invitation marked a turning point. What he didn't fully realize yet was how deeply those new connections would reshape his life, not only professionally but personally as well. The dinner took place in an exclusive rooftop lounge overlooking the city. Soft lights reflected off polished glass tables, while conversations flowed between entrepreneurs, artists, and investors. That evening, Lincoln met Kayla Walsh, Theo's daughter. She carried herself with effortless confidence, greeting him with a poised smile. "I've heard a lot about you," she said. "My father doesn't praise people easily." Lincoln inclined his head politely. "I hope I live up to the reputation." Kayla laughed lightly. "In this world, reputation is half the work already." Their conversation felt smooth, guided by shared understanding of ambition and public image. Unlike Shaney's curious questions about creativity, Kayla spoke about expansion, influence, and the power of perception. She introduced him to others effortlessly, weaving him into conversations where opportunities appeared almost instantly. "You belong here," she told him later, gesturing toward the crowd. "People respect clarity and confidence." Lincoln listened, aware that this environment moved at a faster pace than the quiet bookstore evenings he had grown used to. The contrast didn't feel wrong, just different. As the night ended, he glanced at his phone again. Another message from Shaney waited. "Hope the meeting went well. Don't forget to rest sometimes." He typed a short reply. "Thanks, busy night. Talk soon," before returning his attention to the conversation around him. Weeks passed quickly. Meetings filled his calendar from morning until late evening, leaving little room for the slow conversations he once enjoyed. Success demanded presence, and Lincoln responded by tightening his schedule even further. At the bookstore, Shaney noticed the empty chair by the window more often. When he did visit, his phone buzzed constantly, pulling his attention away mid-sentence. "You look tired," she said one evening, handing him a book he had reserved earlier. "Just a busy phase," he replied, glancing at another notification. "Things are moving fast." She nodded, though her eyes lingered on him longer than usual. "Fast isn't always better." He gave a small smile. "Right now, it's necessary." Their conversations grew shorter, not because he cared less, but because his thoughts remained divided between present moments and future plans. Even when they walked along the river, his pace quickened, as though he were already late for something unseen. The first canceled dinner felt accidental. The second felt unavoidable. By the third time Lincoln apologized for postponing their plans, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. One evening, Shaney waited outside the bookstore after closing, watching the streetlights flicker on. She checked her phone again. A message from Lincoln arrived just minutes before they were supposed to meet. "I'm sorry. Investor dinner ran longer than expected." She typed back slowly. "It's okay." Another time. When Lincoln finally called later that night, his voice carried genuine regret. "I didn't mean to keep canceling," he said. "Things are just complicated right now." "I understand," she replied calmly. "You're building something important." He hesitated, sensing that her composure hid more than she revealed. "We'll make time soon," he promised. She smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it through the phone. "I hope so." The calls grew shorter after that. Where they once spoke for hours about ideas and dreams, conversations shifted toward updates and reassurances that everything was fine. One afternoon, she visited a gallery opening where his company had sponsored an exhibit. The space felt unfamiliar, sleek, crowded, filled with conversations about strategy and growth. Kayla stood beside Lincoln, introducing him to guests with confident ease. When Shaney approached, Lincoln's expression softened briefly. "You came," he said, surprised. "I wanted to see what you've been working on," she replied. Kayla greeted her politely, though her attention quickly returned to other guests waiting nearby. The interaction remained courteous, yet something unspoken hung in the air, a realization that Lincoln's world had expanded beyond the quiet spaces where their connection first grew. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Shaney spoke gently. "You're changing," she said, not as criticism, but as observation. Lincoln exhaled slowly. "Growth requires adjustment." She nodded. "Just don't forget who you were before all this." Her words stayed with him long after she left, echoing louder than the praise he received from investors. As weeks turned into months, Lincoln found himself standing at a crossroads he never expected to face. Theo's influence deepened, guiding him toward partnerships that promised long-term stability. Kayla became a constant presence at events, their shared goals aligning naturally within the elite circles he now moved through. Meanwhile, his visits to the bookstore became rare. The window seat remained empty more often than not, and the warmth that once grounded him began to feel like a memory from another life. One evening, after another successful meeting, Theo spoke to him privately. "Ambition demands clarity," he said. "You can't hesitate when the future is in front of you." Lincoln understood what he meant, even without the words being fully spoken. The path ahead required decisions that extended beyond business, choices about relationships, identity, and the direction he wanted his life to take. That night, as he walked alone through the city streets, Memories of Shaney's laughter and the calm of the bookstore resurfaced unexpectedly, yet the momentum of his current world pulled him forward, urging him not to look back. The rain began to fall softly, mirroring a feeling he couldn't quite name. Not regret, not certainty, but the quiet awareness that something important was shifting. And somewhere beneath that gray sky, the moment that would define both of their lives drew closer. The sky above Ashford hung low and gray that afternoon. Inside, warm lights softened the edges of the room while soft music played in the background. It was the same place Lincoln and Shaney had visited countless times before, a familiar corner that once felt effortless. Shaney arrived first, choosing a table near the window where droplets traced slow patterns across the glass. She wrapped her hands around a cup of tea, watching the street outside blur into shifting reflections. Something in Lincoln's message earlier had felt different, more formal, more distant, yet she refused to assume the worst. When he entered, the bell above the door chimed gently. He paused for a second, scanning the room until his eyes found hers. His posture was composed, almost too composed, as if he had rehearsed this moment long before stepping inside. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, taking the seat across from her. She smiled softly. "You sounded serious." He nodded, though his gaze drifted briefly outside. The cafe felt smaller than usual, the air heavier with words waiting to be spoken. For a few minutes they spoke about ordinary things, work updates, mutual acquaintances, the way the weather had changed unexpectedly. Yet beneath the surface, Lincoln's attention remained fixed on something he struggled to express. Finally, he placed both hands on the table, fingers interlocked. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, voice steady. Shaney watched him carefully, sensing the shift. "Okay." He inhaled slowly, as though measuring every word. "My life is changing faster than I expected. New responsibilities, new expectations." His tone held no hesitation, only quiet certainty. She waited, giving him space to continue. "I'm moving forward with plans that require clarity," he said. Then, after a brief pause that felt longer than it was, he added, "Don't interfere. I'm marrying someone else." The sentence landed softly yet firmly, like a door closing without noise. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't look away. To anyone else in the room, it might have sounded like a simple announcement, but between them it reshaped everything. For a moment, Shaney said nothing. Her expression remained gentle, her posture steady. Only her eyes revealed the depth of what she felt, a quiet effort to hold herself together. She lifted her cup slowly, giving herself a second before responding. "Then I hope she makes you happy," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't ask questions or demand explanations. The grace of her reply carried more strength than anger ever could. Lincoln watched her closely, perhaps expecting resistance, perhaps hoping for understanding. "I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else," he added quietly. "I appreciate that," she replied, offering a faint smile that hid the weight behind it. "You've always been honest." She looked out the window briefly, gathering herself before turning back to him. "You're choosing the path you believe in. I can respect that." Inside, emotions moved quickly, memories of bookstore evenings, river walks, and conversations about dreams. Yet she allowed none of that to surface outwardly. Instead, she met him with dignity, refusing to let pain define the moment. Lincoln stood after a few more minutes, sensing that nothing more needed to be said. The air between them felt fragile, balanced on words that neither wanted to push further. "I wish things were different," he said quietly. She nodded once. "So do I." He hesitated, as though considering whether to reach for her hand one last time. Instead, he stepped back, offering a polite goodbye that felt strangely formal after everything they had shared. The bell chimed again as he left the cafe, blending his figure into the gray afternoon as he walked down the street without turning around. Shaney remained seated, watching the door long after it closed. The room carried on as usual, cups clinking, conversations continuing, yet for her, time seemed to slow. She exhaled slowly, letting the silence settle around her. Minutes passed before she finally stood. She placed money on the table, adjusting her coat carefully, as though every movement required intention. No tears fell, no dramatic reaction followed, just a quiet acceptance that something important had ended. Outside, rain cooled the air as she walked toward the river. The city moved around her, unaware of the shift that had taken place inside that small cafe. She paused near the railing, watching water ripple beneath the bridge where they once laughed about simple things. Her reflection in the glass storefront beside her looked composed, yet her eyes carried a depth of understanding she hadn't possessed before. "People choose their own paths," she whispered softly, more to herself than to anyone else. The moment didn't demand explanation. It existed simply as a turning point, a chapter closing without noise. Time moved forward, carrying both of them into lives shaped by that single decision. Lincoln stepped fully into the world of high-profile leadership, standing beside Kayla at charity events, business launches, and international conferences. Headlines praised his vision, and investors spoke of him as a rising force in the industry. Yet even as success grew, something remained unspoken beneath the polished image he presented to the world. 5 years later, the city of Ashford still woke early, glass towers reflecting the morning sun. Lincoln's name appeared across magazine covers, his achievements celebrated as symbols of ambition fulfilled. At a gala filled with influential guests, he shook hands and accepted praise with calm professionalism. Cameras flashed, capturing a version of him that seemed flawless from every angle. But when the music softened and the crowd shifted, a quiet emptiness lingered behind his composed expression, a reminder of choices made long ago. And somewhere else in the city, a design agency was gaining recognition for its emotional storytelling, led by someone who had walked out of a cafe years earlier with grace instead of bitterness. The paths that once separated them were slowly moving closer again, even if neither of them fully realized it yet. 5 years after, Lincoln Rolfson's name had become almost impossible to ignore. Business magazines featured him on glossy covers, describing him as a visionary who turned ambition into reality. Headlines praised his discipline, investors quoted his strategies, and conferences competed to secure him as a keynote speaker. One morning, he sat in a quiet studio while a photographer adjusted the lights. "Look just slightly to the left," she said. "Perfect. That calm expression is exactly what we need." Lincoln followed the instructions without hesitation. Cameras clicked, capturing the composed version of him the public had grown used to. Confident, precise, untouchable. During the interview that followed, a journalist asked, "What drives you to keep expanding when you've already achieved so much?" He paused briefly before answering. "Growth isn't about reaching a finish line. It's about building something that lasts." The words sounded convincing, yet somewhere beneath them lingered a feeling he didn't fully understand. Applause came easily now, recognition arriving without effort, yet the satisfaction he expected never settled the way he imagined years ago. When the shoot ended, assistants handed him a copy of the magazine layout. He studied his own image for a moment, sharp suit, steady gaze, a symbol of success that felt strangely distant from the person he remembered being. That evening, Lincoln and Kayla attended a private dinner hosted by influential partners. They moved through the room effortlessly, exchanging greetings and discussing future collaborations as though performing a well-practiced routine. Later, as they drove home, Kayla reviewed notes on her tablet. "The foundation wants to expand into 2 new cities," she said. "It's a good opportunity for visibility." Lincoln nodded. "Let's review the details tomorrow." She glanced at him briefly. "You handled the press well today. Your tone was measured, exactly what they expect." "Thank you," he replied, his voice calm. Their conversations rarely drifted toward personal reflections. Instead, they focused on logistics, partnerships, and maintaining a strong public image. There was respect between them, a shared understanding of goals, but warmth often stayed just beyond reach. When they entered the penthouse, Kayla moved toward her office to continue working, leaving Lincoln alone near the window. He loosened his tie slowly, listening to the faint hum of the city below. "Busy week," she said from across the room without looking up. "It always is," he answered. The exchange ended there, efficient, polite, and strangely distant. Days later, Lincoln attended another high-profile gala filled with industry leaders and philanthropists. Chandeliers reflected soft light across polished floors while conversations drifted between business and social influence. He moved through the crowd with ease, greeting familiar faces and exchanging measured smiles. 2 guests stood nearby, unaware he could hear them. "He's impressive," one said quietly. "Everything he touches seems to succeed." The other responded, "Yes, but he always looks like he's somewhere else." Lincoln didn't react outwardly. He simply lifted his glass and acknowledged a group approaching him from across the room. Still, the comment lingered in his thoughts longer than the applause he received that evening. "The investors are pleased," she said. "This event is going exactly as planned." He nodded. "That's good." She studied him for a moment. "You should smile more tonight. People connect with that." "I'll keep it in mind," he replied, offering a faint expression that satisfied the cameras but didn't quite reach his eyes. As the music grew louder and laughter filled the hall, Lincoln stepped onto the balcony for a moment of quiet. The city lights stretched endlessly below, beautiful and distant at the same time. Later that night, the penthouse felt unusually still. Awards lined the shelves, reflecting faint light from the skyline outside. Lincoln removed his jacket and placed it carefully on a chair, the echo of the gala fading with each passing minute. He poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching traffic move far below. Without the noise of events or meetings, the quiet pressed against him in a way he couldn't ignore. His phone buzzed with messages. congratulations, invitations, updates, yet none of them felt urgent enough to answer immediately. He set the device aside and let himself breathe without a schedule dictating his next move. The room carried a polished elegance, but something about it felt incomplete. The space held success, yet lacked the warmth he once associated with connection. He moved toward a shelf where framed photographs stood among awards. Most captured public moments, speeches, ribbon cuttings, formal portraits. There were few personal memories displayed, as though the life he lived now existed primarily for others to see. Lincoln leaned against the window, watching his reflection merge with the city lights. For years he had believed that reaching this level of achievement would bring clarity, a sense of arrival that justified every decision made along the way. Instead, a quiet question formed in his mind. When did everything start feeling distant? He thought about conversations, filled with strategy but not laughter, about evenings spent planning rather than simply living. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. The soft rustle of pages in a bookstore, the sound of a voice teasing him about always thinking too far ahead. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing the memory to pass without fully exploring it. The past rarely fit into his present schedule, yet tonight it felt closer than usual. Kayla walked into the room, setting her tablet on the table. "You're still awake?" she asked. "Just thinking," he replied. She studied him for a moment. "We're exactly where we planned to be. That's something to be proud of." "It is," he said quietly. But even as he agreed, he felt a subtle emptiness he couldn't explain. Not regret exactly, not dissatisfaction, just an awareness that something meaningful had been left behind in the pursuit of everything else. Outside, the city of Ashford continued moving without pause, lights reflecting across the glass towers he once admired from afar. Lincoln remained by the window, the silence around him revealing more than any celebration ever could. And somewhere deep within that silence, a memory began to stir. A reminder of a time when success felt less important than the simple presence of someone who made the world slow down. A few weeks after the gala, Lincoln reviewed proposals for a new branding initiative inside his office. Most presentations looked polished but predictable, sleek visuals designed to impress rather than connect. He flipped through page after page until one file caught his attention. The design felt different, bold typography paired with quiet emotional storytelling, images that didn't just advertise a company, but seemed to understand people behind the numbers. He paused longer than usual, studying the details. "Who created this?" he asked his assistant. "A smaller agency that's been gaining attention lately," she replied. "They've built a strong reputation for authenticity. The founder's name is Shani Whitting." The room fell silent for a moment. Lincoln's expression didn't change, yet something shifted behind his calm exterior. He closed the file slowly, absorbing the weight of the name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. "Schedule a meeting," he said finally. As his assistant left, he leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the design still glowing on his screen. The work carried a warmth he recognized immediately, thoughtful, honest, grounded in emotion rather than perfection. He hadn't expected their worlds to cross again like this. The conference room overlooking Ashford's skyline had hosted countless negotiations, yet that afternoon felt different. Lincoln arrived early, reviewing notes he barely needed. A quiet tension lingered in the air, subtle but unmistakable. His assistant adjusted the projector. He nodded, standing near the window. The city below moved as usual, traffic flowing, sunlight reflecting across glass towers. But his thoughts drifted toward memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. A knock sounded at the door. For a brief second, he hesitated before turning around, the calm expression he carried in public firmly in place. Years of discipline made it easy to appear composed, even when uncertainty stirred beneath the surface. "Send them in," he said. The door opened slowly, and the past stepped into the present. Shani Whitting walked into the room with quiet confidence, a portfolio tucked beneath her arm. She wore a simple tailored suit, her posture steady and self-assured. Time had changed her in ways that felt both familiar and new. The warmth remained, but it was balanced now by strength shaped through experience. "Mr. Rolfson," she greeted politely, extending her hand. Lincoln accepted the handshake, noticing how firm her grip felt. "Ms. Whitting," he replied. "It's been a while." She smiled slightly. "It has." Her team settled around the table while she prepared the presentation. There was no hesitation in her movements, no sign that stepping into this room carried any emotional weight. To anyone else, this looked like a standard business meeting between two professionals meeting for the first time. Yet beneath the surface, years of shared history lingered quietly. Lincoln took his seat, watching as she connected her laptop. The calm confidence she carried unsettled him more than he expected, not because she had changed, but because she no longer seemed affected by his presence. The presentation began smoothly. Slides moved across the screen, each one reflecting thoughtful storytelling rather than aggressive marketing. Our approach focuses on emotional connection, Shaney explained. People don't remember companies for their numbers alone. They remember how those companies make them feel. Lincoln listened closely, asking questions that sounded purely strategic. And how would you maintain authenticity while scaling? He asked. We don't treat growth as speed, she replied calmly. We treat it as depth. Her tone remained professional, yet every word carried a quiet confidence that drew attention around the table. Team members exchanged impressed glances, unaware of the deeper history between the two people leading the discussion. At one point, their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of everything left unsaid. Neither mentioned the bookstore, the river walks, or the cafe goodbye. Instead, they spoke about timelines, deliverables, and long-term vision. When the presentation ended, Lincoln leaned back slightly. Your work is impressive, he said. You've built something remarkable. So have you, she answered, her voice steady. Looks like we both survived. The faint humor in her response softened the room, yet it also carried a truth that lingered long after the meeting continued. As discussions moved toward collaboration details, Lincoln found himself observing Shaney more than he intended. She led her team with calm authority, inviting input, adjusting ideas, and guiding the conversation without hesitation. There was no trace of the uncertainty he remembered from years earlier. She didn't look at him for reassurance or validation. Instead, she spoke as an equal, someone who had built her own success without relying on his world. During a short break, she stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. Lincoln followed a few moments later, the quiet outside offering a contrast to the structured meeting inside. You've changed, he said, resting his hands lightly against the railing. So have you, she replied, glancing at the skyline. He hesitated. You seem confident. She laughed softly. I always was. I just learned to trust it more. Her words weren't defensive, they were simply true, and for the first time, Lincoln felt a subtle shift in perspective. Years ago, he believed he had moved forward while she stayed behind. Now he realized she had grown in her own direction, one that didn't revolve around him at all. When they returned to the conference room, the atmosphere felt slightly different, quieter, more thoughtful. Their professional rhythm continued smoothly, yet an undercurrent of emotion moved beneath each exchange. As the meeting wrapped up, Lincoln walked her toward the elevator. It was good seeing you, he said, choosing his words carefully. You too, she replied. Work looks good on you. He smiled faintly. And confidence looks good on you. For a brief moment, silence stretched between them, filled with memories neither addressed directly. The past existed there, not heavy enough to break the present, but strong enough to shape it. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, turning back once more. We'll send the revised proposal tomorrow, she said. I'll review it personally, he answered. The doors closed softly, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, watching his reflection in the polished surface. The reunion hadn't brought dramatic closure or sudden answers. Instead, it reopened a chapter he thought had ended long ago, and the most unsettling part wasn't the history between them. It was realizing how calm and independent she'd become without him. Before we continue, think about this for a moment. When two people meet again after years apart, are they reconnecting with who they were or discovering who they've become? If you believe in second chances, not as a return to the past, but as a chance to grow differently, share your thoughts and stay connected to this journey. Your likes, comments, and support help stories like this reach others who might need a reminder that time changes more than circumstances, it changes people. Because for Lincoln and Shaney, this reunion wasn't the end of a story. It was only the beginning of a new chapter, one shaped not by old promises, but by the quiet tension of everything still left unresolved. The collaboration between Lincoln's company and Shaney's agency began with a rhythm neither of them expected. Meetings that were supposed to be strictly strategic often turned into deeper conversations about purpose and direction. Instead of rushing through agendas, they took time to examine ideas from different perspectives. During one session, a junior executive suggested a bold campaign built entirely on numbers and performance metrics. Lincoln studied the proposal carefully before turning to Shaney. What do you think? He asked. She leaned forward, scanning the slides. It's efficient, she said, but it doesn't feel human. People connect with stories, not just statistics. The room grew quiet. Lincoln considered her words longer than usual. Years earlier, he might have dismissed that perspective as too emotional. Now he found himself agreeing. Let's reshape the concept, he said. Keep the strategy, but give it depth. Her team exchanged subtle smiles, surprised by how naturally their visions aligned. The meetings became less about proving authority and more about building something meaningful together, a balance neither had experienced before. As weeks passed, their discussions continued long after formal meetings ended. Sometimes they stayed behind reviewing details while the rest of the team packed up, speaking with a familiarity that felt cautious yet genuine. One afternoon, Lincoln noticed her adjusting a design layout, carefully moving elements until the flow felt right. "You still work the same way," he observed. "How's that?" she asked without looking up. "You don't rush decisions," he replied. "You let them settle." She smiled slightly. "Some things need time to make sense." The comment lingered between them, hinting at more than just design choices. For Lincoln, slowing down had once felt like weakness. Now, he found himself appreciating the patience she brought into the process. Their conversations carried a quiet ease, not the effortless warmth of the past, but something steadier shaped by experience. After one particularly long meeting, they stepped onto the balcony overlooking Ashford's skyline. Evening light softened the buildings, turning the city into a calm backdrop instead of a constant race. Lincoln rested his hands against the railing. "Do you ever think about how differently things turned out?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly. "Sometimes, but I don't stay there long. I used to believe every choice was logical," he said quietly. "Now I'm not so sure." She studied him for a moment before answering. "Logic isn't wrong. It just doesn't always tell the whole story." A breeze moved through the air, carrying distant sounds from the street below. The silence between them felt comfortable, not heavy, not awkward. "I thought success would make everything clear," he continued. "Instead, it made me question more." Shaney nodded slowly. "Growth does that. It changes what you value." Her tone held no blame, only understanding shaped by time. Lincoln glanced toward her. "You don't seem angry," he said. She laughed softly. "I was once. But anger takes energy I'd rather use building something better." Her honesty caught him off guard. He had expected resentment, or at least distance. Instead, she spoke with calm clarity that felt both grounding and confronting. "You always carried everything alone," she added gently. "Even when you didn't have to." He exhaled slowly. "I thought independence meant strength." "It can," she replied. "But connection is strength too." The words landed deeper than any criticism he had faced in boardrooms. She wasn't trying to change him. She was simply reflecting a truth he had avoided for years. "I've been learning that," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "Learning is a good place to start." The conversation didn't linger on the past. Instead, it focused on who they were becoming. Two people shaped by different journeys, meeting again with new perspectives. Back inside, the collaboration continued to evolve. Lincoln began inviting Shaney's input earlier in the decision-making process, valuing her ability to see beyond immediate outcomes. She in turn acknowledged his strategic clarity, recognizing the discipline that allowed his company to grow. During a brainstorming session, one of his executives commented, "You two think completely differently, but somehow it works." Shaney glanced at Lincoln, amused. "Different doesn't have to mean conflict." He nodded. "Sometimes it creates balance." Their teamwork felt natural, built not on old familiarity but on mutual respect earned through experience. Small gestures, a shared glance after a successful presentation, a quiet laugh during a tense meeting, hinted at a connection slowly rebuilding without forcing anything. Despite the growing ease between them, neither crossed personal boundaries. Conversations stayed grounded in the present, avoiding dramatic confessions or lingering on memories that might complicate their professional space. One evening, as they walked toward the elevator after work, Lincoln said quietly, "Working with you again feels familiar." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Familiar isn't always a bad thing. It just means you remember who you were." He nodded, understanding the careful balance she maintained, close enough to reconnect, distant enough to protect herself. The tension between them didn't demand resolution, it simply existed, shaped by respect and patience. As the elevator doors closed, they stood side by side in comfortable silence, the city lights reflecting across the mirrored walls. The moment carried a quiet warmth, yet neither reached beyond what felt appropriate. Weeks turned into months, and the collaboration brought noticeable changes to Lincoln's company. Campaigns felt more authentic, employees spoke about renewed purpose, and the atmosphere inside the office softened slightly. During a small celebration for a successful launch, Lincoln raised a glass toward Shaney. "Your perspective changed more than the project," he said. She smiled. "Sometimes all people need is a reminder to slow down and listen." He considered her words, realizing how much he had learned simply by allowing someone else's voice to shape his world again. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, he stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer below. Shaney joined him quietly. "You've grown," she said. "So have you," he replied. They exchanged a brief smile, not filled with nostalgia, but with recognition of who they had become. The connection between them no longer belonged to the past alone. It existed in the present, shaped by growth rather than longing. And though neither spoke about what the future might hold, the foundation of respect and understanding they were rebuilding hinted that their story was moving forward, slowly, carefully, and with a maturity that neither of them had possessed years earlier. The shift started subtly. A partnership Lincoln had spent months negotiating suddenly stalled when investors withdrew support without clear explanation. Another expansion project faced unexpected regulatory delays, pushing timelines further than anyone anticipated. Inside the boardroom, executives spoke in careful tones, reviewing projections that no longer matched earlier expectations. "We can recover if we adjust quickly," one director suggested. Lincoln studied the numbers in silence before responding. "Then we adjust. Panic doesn't solve anything." Outwardly, he remained composed, yet he felt the pressure tightening around him. Success had always come through calculated risk, but this time the setbacks arrived from multiple directions at once. Emails filled his inbox late into the night, each one carrying a new complication. Deals that once felt certain began to fade, leaving behind unanswered questions and growing tension within the company. For the first time in years, Lincoln sensed that control was slipping, even if he refused to admit it aloud. Soon, media coverage began to change. Articles that once praised his vision now questioned whether rapid growth had stretched the company too far. Analysts debated his decisions on televised panels, their voices calm but critical. One morning, his assistant placed a tablet on his desk. "You might want to see this," she said gently. The headline read, "Is Rolfson Global Losing Its Edge?" Lincoln skimmed the article without reacting. "Focus on the work," he said, handing the tablet back. Public opinion moves quickly. Still, the words lingered longer than he expected. At a networking event later that week, conversations felt different, less enthusiastic, more cautious. Investors asked sharper questions, and colleagues watched him closely. Searching for signs of uncertainty, Kayla addressed the situation with her usual precision. "We need to reinforce confidence publicly," she said during a strategy meeting. "Appearances matter now more than ever." Lincoln nodded, though a quiet fatigue had begun to settle beneath his steady expression. The world that once celebrated his rise now measured his every move with greater intensity. As pressure mounted, Lincoln spent more evenings alone in his office long after employees left. The glow of city lights filtered through the windows while spreadsheets covered his desk. He reviewed projections again and again, searching for solutions hidden between numbers. A half-empty cup of coffee sat beside him as midnight passed unnoticed. His assistant stopped by briefly. "You should rest," she said softly. "You've been here since morning." "I'll leave soon," he replied without looking up. When the door closed, silence returned, broken only by the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. The calm confidence he once carried felt heavier now, weighed down by expectations that no longer felt effortless. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes briefly before returning to work. Solving problems alone had always been his strength, but tonight, the quiet felt different, less empowering and more isolating. During one particularly late night, Lincoln closed a file and stared at the reflection of the city beyond the glass. Without warning, memories surfaced. The sound of pages turning in a small bookstore, the warmth of a cup of coffee placed beside him without being asked. He remembered laughter that didn't require planning, conversations that didn't revolve around profit or risk. The contrast between then and now felt sharper than ever. "You always look like you're thinking 10 years ahead," Shaney's voice echoed faintly in his mind. He allowed himself a small smile before returning his focus to the present. Those memories didn't belong to the life he had built, yet they carried a calm he couldn't ignore. For a brief moment, he wondered what it would feel like to step away from numbers and expectations, to sit by a window again without a schedule waiting for him. The thought faded as another notification appeared on his screen, pulling him back into the demands of the moment. A few days later, Lincoln agreed to meet Shaney for lunch to discuss updates on their collaboration. The restaurant overlooked a quiet courtyard, offering a rare break from the noise of the city. When she arrived, she studied him carefully before sitting down. "You look tired," she said gently. "Just a busy week," he replied, attempting a light tone. She tilted her head, unconvinced. Busy and exhausted aren't the same thing. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the menu as though searching for distraction. "You don't have to pretend everything's fine," she added softly. He met her gaze, realizing she had always seen through the calm surface he presented to others. "Some things are complicated right now," he admitted. She nodded, giving him space to continue without pushing. They spoke about the project, briefly, yet the conversation carried an undercurrent of concern that neither ignored. For the first time in weeks, Lincoln allowed himself to slow down, if only for the duration of the meal. After lunch, they walked slowly through the courtyard, sunlight filtering through tall trees. The pace felt calmer than the relentless rhythm of his office. "You've always handled things alone," Shaney said quietly. "It works," he replied. "At least it used to." She stopped walking, turning toward him. "Strength isn't just about handling pressure. It's also about knowing when to let someone stand beside you." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'm responsible for too many people to show uncertainty." She smiled gently. "Responsibility doesn't mean isolation." Her honesty felt grounding rather than confrontational. She wasn't offering solutions or judgment, just a perspective shaped by years of growth. "I'm not used to asking for help," he admitted finally. "You don't have to ask," she said softly. "Sometimes it's enough to stop pretending you don't need it." The moment lingered quietly between them, filled with understanding rather than expectation. Back at the office later that day, Lincoln reviewed another report detailing delays in a major project. He closed the document slowly, feeling the weight of each decision more than ever before. For years, he believed success required unwavering control. Now, facing challenges he couldn't solve alone, he began to question whether control had created distance rather than strength. He glanced out the window, the skyline reflecting both achievement and pressure. Somewhere beyond those buildings, a bookstore still existed, a reminder of a time when connection felt simple. His phone buzzed with a message from Shaney. "Take care of yourself. The project will still be here tomorrow." He stared at the words for a moment before placing the phone down. The message didn't solve his problems, yet it reminded him that someone still saw him beyond his role as a CEO. As evening settled over Ashford, Lincoln remained at his desk, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city. The cracks in his empire weren't loud or dramatic. They were subtle, persistent, forcing him to confront a truth he had avoided for years. Success alone could not carry him forever, and for the first time he wondered whether the strength he had always relied on needed to change if he wanted to move forward at all. The penthouse felt unusually still that night. Soft city lights filtered through the wide windows, reflecting across polished floors while distant traffic hummed below. Lincoln stood near the kitchen counter reviewing a message on his phone when Kayla walked in, closing her tablet with a measured motion. "We need to talk," she said gently. Her tone carried no urgency, only calm certainty, the same composure she brought to business decisions. Lincoln set his phone aside and nodded. They moved to the sitting area, leaving space between them on opposite ends of the couch. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt honest rather than uncomfortable, as though both had sensed this conversation approaching long before it arrived. Kayla broke the quiet first. "The last few months have been different," she said. "Not just because of work." Lincoln exhaled slowly. "I felt it too." She studied him carefully. "We've always been good partners, organized, focused, aligned. But lately it feels like we're managing an agreement instead of sharing a life." He didn't argue. The truth of her words settled between them with surprising ease. Kayla leaned back slightly, choosing her words with care. "When we first got married, everything made sense. Our goals matched. Our families supported it. We knew how to present ourselves to the world." Lincoln nodded. It felt practical. "Yes," she said softly, "practical." There was no bitterness in her voice, only clarity. Over time, their conversations had become increasingly strategic. Schedules, appearances, public image, while personal moments faded into the background. "I don't regret what we built," she continued, "but I think we both know something essential has been missing." Lincoln glanced toward the window, watching the reflection of city lights. "I thought stability would eventually turn into something deeper," he admitted. "Maybe for some people," she replied, "but we built a structure that worked professionally, not emotionally." The honesty in her statement carried relief rather than blame. Neither of them needed to defend their choices. They simply acknowledged what had always existed beneath the surface. The conversation moved forward gently, without raised voices or accusations. Kayla folded her hands together, her expression thoughtful. "I don't want us to stay together just because it looks right," she said. "We deserve something more honest than that." Lincoln met her gaze. "Are you saying we should separate?" She nodded slowly. "I think we already have, in ways we never admitted aloud." The words didn't feel like a loss, they felt like a release. Years of shared expectations gave way to a quiet understanding that their paths had shifted. "We can handle this respectfully," she added. "No unnecessary drama, just clarity." "That sounds right," he replied. They discussed practical details calmly. Timelines, public statements, how to maintain professional respect moving forward. The conversation felt more like closing a chapter than ending a conflict. When they stood from the couch, Kayla offered a small, genuine smile. "You'll figure out what you're looking for," she said. "You always do." He returned the smile, grateful for her honesty. "So will you?" Later that night, Lincoln walked through the penthouse alone. The familiar space felt different now, not heavier but quieter in a way that allowed him to think more clearly. He stopped near the window, watching lights stretch across the skyline. For years, he had measured success through expansion and recognition. Now, standing alone, he realized how much of his life had been guided by expectations rather than genuine connection. He thought about Shaney's words from earlier conversations, about growth, about learning to stop pretending everything was fine. Those memories returned not as longing, but as reminders of a different way of living. Lincoln sat at the dining table, resting his hands against the surface, as if grounding himself in the present moment. "I chose stability over feeling," he whispered quietly, "and now I finally understand why it never felt complete." The realization didn't bring sadness. Instead, it carried a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. Over the following days, Lincoln adjusted to the new reality with steady acceptance. Kayla moved into a separate residence nearby, their interactions remaining respectful and professional. Public statements described the separation as mutual and thoughtful, avoiding unnecessary attention. Inside the office, Lincoln felt a subtle shift in his perspective. Without the weight of maintaining an image that no longer fit, he began approaching decisions with a renewed sense of honesty. One evening, after finishing work earlier than usual, he walked along the river, the same path he once shared with Shaney years ago. The air felt lighter, the city quieter. He paused near the railing, watching reflections ripple across the water. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel rushed. Maybe growth isn't about gaining more, he thought. Maybe it's about letting go of what doesn't belong anymore. The separation had not broken him. Instead, it created space to reconsider who he was beyond expectations, beyond reputation, beyond the roles he had carried for so long. As he turned back toward the city lights, Lincoln sensed that this chapter wasn't an ending. It was an opening, a chance to rebuild his life with intention rather than momentum, guided by clarity instead of pressure. And somewhere ahead, conversations he once avoided were waiting to be spoken with honesty for the first time. The cafe on Brookline Street looked almost unchanged despite the years that had passed. Warm lights glowed through the windows, reflecting softly on the damp pavement outside. Lincoln arrived early, choosing the same table near the glass where one sentence had altered the direction of 2 lives. He sat quietly, hands resting around a cup of coffee that had already cooled. The familiar sounds, soft music, low conversation, the gentle clink of cups, stirred memories he had avoided for years. Back then, he had walked out of this place convinced he was moving toward certainty. Now he returned carrying questions instead of answers. A server approached. "Would you like anything else, sir?" "No, thank you," he replied, offering a small nod. He checked the time, then looked toward the door again. Waiting felt unfamiliar to him. In business, he controlled the pace of every meeting. Here, he could only sit with his thoughts, replaying moments he had never fully processed. "What am I hoping for?" he murmured quietly to himself. The bell above the door chimed softly, and Shaney stepped inside. She paused briefly near the entrance, scanning the room until her eyes found him. For a second, neither moved. The space between them felt filled with history, yet their expressions remained calm. She approached slowly, removing her coat as she reached the table. "You chose this place on purpose," she said gently. Lincoln stood to greet her, offering a respectful smile. "I thought it was time to stop avoiding it." She sat across from him, posture relaxed yet cautious. The years had given her a quiet strength that showed in every movement. There was no tension in her expression, only curiosity about why he had asked to meet here. "How have you been?" she asked, her tone neutral but sincere. "Learning," he answered, "more than I expected." She nodded, waiting for him to continue. The air between them felt different from their reunion at the office, less formal, more personal, yet still grounded in maturity. Lincoln took a slow breath before speaking again. "I've been thinking about the day we last sat here," he said, "about what I said, and how I said it." Shaney listened quietly, her gaze steady. "I thought I understood what success required," he continued. "I believed I was choosing the right path, but lately I've realized I never fully understood what I was leaving behind." His voice remained calm, free from dramatic emotion, yet every word carried sincerity. "I'm not here to rewrite the past," he added. "I just needed to admit that I regret how I handled things, not because my life didn't move forward, but because I didn't see the value of what we had till much later." She watched him carefully, considering his words before responding. The honesty in his tone felt genuine, not rehearsed. "It took time to understand what that decision cost," he finished quietly. The cafe remained calm around them, other conversations blending into the background while their own felt quietly significant. Shaney rested her hands on the table, her expression thoughtful rather than emotional. "You made a choice," she said gently, "and I made one too, to keep moving forward instead of holding on to anger." Her voice carried calm clarity. Back then, I was hurt. Not because you chose a different path, but because I realized I couldn't control where you were going. Lincoln nodded slowly. You never tried to. That's because people grow in their own direction, she replied. Sometimes together, sometimes apart. There was no bitterness in her words, only perspective shaped by experience. She didn't ask for apologies or explanations beyond what he had already offered. I'm glad you came here, she added softly, not for closure, just for honesty. The simplicity of her response surprised him. He had expected tension or unresolved questions, yet she met him with understanding that felt both comforting and humbling. They left the cafe together as evening settled over Ashford. For a moment, Lincoln hesitated near the door, remembering how he had once walked away without looking back. This time, they stepped outside side by side. The air felt cool, carrying the quiet rhythm of the city. Neither rushed to speak. Instead, they walked slowly along the sidewalk. Funny how the same place can feel completely different, he said. It's not the place that changes, she replied. It's the people. They paused near the corner where their paths had once separated. The moment felt familiar yet calmer, shaped by years of growth instead of uncertainty. Lincoln glanced toward her. I'm not asking for anything tonight, he said. I just wanted to be honest with you. She smiled faintly. That's enough. A quiet reminder of how far they had come since that first goodbye. Before we move forward in their story, take a moment to think about this. What does karma really mean to you? Is it punishment for past choices, or simply the clarity that arrives when time shows us the full picture? If you've ever faced a moment where life brought you back to someone or somewhere you once walked away from, share your thoughts and stay part of this journey. Your likes, comments, and support help stories like this continue. Stories about growth, understanding, and second chances that arrive quietly rather than all at once. Because for Lincoln and Shaney, this return to the cafe wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a conversation shaped not by regret alone, but by the possibility of moving forward with honesty, whatever that might mean for both of them next. The auditorium buzzed with quiet anticipation as investors and executives filled their seats. Screens displayed the company's logo, lights dimmed slightly, and Lincoln stood near the stage reviewing his notes one final time. This presentation wasn't just another update. It was meant to restore confidence after months of uncertainty. An assistant approached him. Everyone's ready. He nodded once, adjusting his jacket before stepping forward. Applause greeted him politely as he began, voice steady and controlled. Thank you for being here, he said. Today is about clarity, where we've been and where we're going next. Slides appeared behind him, outlining strategy, restructuring plans, and new partnerships designed to stabilize the company. He spoke with precision, every sentence measured. For years, moments like this had felt natural, almost effortless. Today, however, the air carried a heavier weight. From the front row, several investors watched with folded arms, their expressions harder to read than before. Lincoln sensed the shift but continued, determined to lead the room with confidence. Halfway through the presentation, the screen flickered unexpectedly. The next slide failed to load, leaving a blank glow behind him. A technician hurried to adjust the system, whispering apologies through a headset. Lincoln paused, offering a brief smile. Technology likes to test us sometimes, he said lightly. A few guests laughed, but the mood felt tense. When the slides returned, several data points appeared misaligned, projections that looked incomplete instead of reassuring. Questions began to rise from the audience, sharper than anticipated. What guarantees do we have that the restructuring will hold? One investor asked. Lincoln answered calmly, outlining the plan step by step. Yet another interruption followed when a live demo failed to connect, leaving the room filled with murmurs. Kayla, seated near the side, watched silently, her expression composed yet distant. The momentum he had built earlier slipped away little by little. Each technical issue seemed small on its own, but together they created doubt that spread across the room like a slow ripple. By the time he reached the closing slide, applause sounded polite rather than enthusiastic. Conversations began immediately, investors leaning toward one another, voices low but serious. Lincoln stepped away from the podium, his calm expression unchanged, though inside a quiet pressure tightened around him. After the event ended, Lincoln moved through the hallway while staff packed up equipment behind him. Reporters waited near the entrance, microphones ready. Mr. Rolfson, are you concerned about the company's future? One asked. We're focused on moving forward, he replied evenly, offering no sign of frustration. He continued walking, passing through the revolving doors into the evening air. The sky hung low, rain beginning to fall in soft, steady drops. For the first time all day, he allowed his shoulders to relax slightly, as though the effort of holding everything together had finally caught up with him. The city felt louder than usual, traffic rushing past, distant conversations blending into a blur. He walked toward the edge of the plaza, stopping near a row of trees where fewer people passed. His reflection in the glass building looked unfamiliar, still composed, yet carrying a weight he could no longer ignore. "I did everything right," he murmured quietly. "So why does it feel like it's slipping away?" The question lingered unanswered. Lincoln didn't move toward shelter. Water soaked through his jacket, blurring the lines of the city around him. For years he had handled every challenge with control, solving problems before anyone noticed they existed. Tonight felt different. He closed his eyes briefly. Memories surfaced without warning. Laughter near the river, quiet evenings in a bookstore, a voice reminding him to slow down. "I thought strength meant never falling," he whispered, barely audible. His breathing grew uneven, not from fear but from the realization that he had been carrying everything alone for too long. The pressure, the public image, the constant need to appear certain, it all felt heavier under the gray sky. For the first time in years, he didn't try to hide the exhaustion behind a calm smile. Footsteps approached softly across the wet pavement. Lincoln opened his eyes to see Shani walking toward him, her coat damp from the rain. She stopped a short distance away, giving him space rather than rushing closer. "I heard about the presentation," she said gently. "I wanted to check on you." He gave a faint laugh. "You didn't have to come." "I know," she replied. "But I wanted to." There was no judgment in her voice, no attempt to fix what had happened. She simply stood beside him, steady and calm, as though her presence alone offered grounding. "I thought I could handle anything," he admitted quietly. "But today, I felt the room shift, like everything I built could disappear." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Pressure shows us what we've been avoiding," she said. "Not to break us, to teach us who we are underneath it." Her words weren't dramatic, they were gentle, spoken with the same calm honesty she had always carried. Lincoln's gaze dropped to the soaked pavement. For a moment he said nothing. Then slowly the weight he had been holding finally released. He sank to his knees, not out of collapse but out of realization, a quiet acknowledgement that he didn't have to stand strong every second. "I thought success would protect me from moments like this," he said, voice unsteady yet honest. "Instead, it showed me everything I ignored." Shani stepped closer, kneeling beside him without hesitation. She didn't try to pull him up immediately. She simply stayed there, her presence calm and unwavering. "Strength isn't about never falling," she said softly. "It's about understanding yourself when you do." He looked at her, eyes clearer than they had been all day. The pressure that once defined him felt lighter, replaced by a quiet sense of acceptance. After a moment he took a slow breath and stood again. The city lights reflected in the wet pavement, turning the moment into something almost peaceful. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. "You don't have to know yet," she replied. "Just take the next honest step." They walked slowly toward the building entrance together. The fall hadn't marked an ending. It marked a shift, a moment when ambition gave way to clarity, and a man who once believed he had to stand alone finally allowed himself to be seen as human. In the weeks following the presentation, Lincoln approached his work with a different mindset. Instead of chasing rapid expansion, he began focusing on projects that reflected long-term purpose. Boardroom discussions shifted from aggressive timelines to sustainable growth, and employees noticed the change almost immediately. During one leadership meeting, he stood at the head of the table, reviewing a proposal that emphasized community impact rather than short-term profit. "We've spent years proving we can grow quickly," he said. "Now I want us to build something that actually matters to the people we serve." A few executives exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't the same tone they were used to hearing from him. Instead of pushing for dominance in the market, he encouraged ideas that connected business goals with human value. One director asked cautiously, "Do you think investors will support that shift?" Lincoln met his gaze calmly. "The right investors will, and the rest were never aligned with us to begin with." The decision didn't come from pressure alone. It came from clarity, a realization that success felt hollow without meaning behind it. As restructuring began, Lincoln started involving more voices in the process. Team members who once waited for his final approval found themselves invited into deeper conversations. During a strategy session, he turned toward Shani and her team. What would make this campaign feel real, not just impressive? She studied the concept for a moment before answering. Show the people behind the work. Let audiences see growth, not perfection. Instead of adjusting the idea alone, Lincoln encouraged the room to build on her suggestion. The discussion became more open, less hierarchical. For someone who once carried every decision himself, this shift felt unfamiliar, yet freeing. After the meeting, one of his senior managers approached him quietly. "You're leading differently," she observed. He smiled faintly. "I'm learning that leadership doesn't mean holding everything alone." The company atmosphere began to change as well. Conversations felt lighter, creativity flowed more naturally, and employees spoke openly about feeling seen rather than directed. Outside the boardroom, Lincoln and Shaney's relationship evolved with careful patience. They spent more time discussing ideas beyond work, yet neither rushed to define what they were rebuilding. Trust grew through consistency rather than grand declarations. One afternoon, they met at a quiet cafe near the office to review a design concept. Sunlight filtered through the windows, creating a calm atmosphere far removed from the pressure of presentations. "You're different lately," Shaney said, stirring her drink thoughtfully. "I'm trying to be," he replied, "not just for the company, for myself." She nodded, studying him with a gentle smile. Change isn't about proving anything. It's about staying honest with who you're becoming. Their conversations carried warmth, yet remained grounded. Neither mentioned the past directly. Instead, they focused on the present, the way they communicated, the way they listened, the way they allowed space for each other to grow. Later, as they walked back toward the office, Lincoln noticed how natural their rhythm felt again, not identical to before, but stronger in a quieter way. The biggest difference between them now lived in the details. Instead of dramatic confessions or rushed promises, their connection deepened through simple moments shared between busy days. One morning, Lincoln arrived early at the office to find a small sketch left on his desk, a concept Shaney had mentioned casually the day before. A note beside it read, "Thought this might help you see the bigger picture." He smiled to himself, realizing how much those small gestures meant compared to the grand displays of success he once valued. Another evening, they walked along the river after a long meeting, the city lights reflecting softly across the water. Neither spoke for several minutes, content with the quiet. "I used to think big moments defined everything," he said finally. She glanced at him. "Sometimes it's the small ones that change us more." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The way she listened when he spoke, the way she challenged him gently when he retreated into old habits, these moments felt more meaningful than any public celebration. As weeks turned into months, Lincoln noticed a shift not only in his company, but in himself. He felt less driven by urgency and more guided by intention. The pressure that once defined him softened, replaced by a sense of purpose rooted in connection rather than control. Standing by the river one evening, he looked at Shaney with quiet gratitude. "Thank you for staying," he said. She smiled warmly. "I didn't stay for who you were before. I stayed because of who you're becoming now." The words lingered between them, simple yet powerful. Their story wasn't about returning to the past. It was about building something new, step by step, moment by moment, with patience guiding every choice they made moving forward. The river ran through Ashford with the same steady rhythm it had years earlier, reflecting evening lights that shimmered across the surface. Lincoln arrived just before sunset, hands resting lightly in his coat pockets as he watched the water move beneath the bridge. This place had once been filled with easy laughter and long conversations about dreams that felt distant back then. Now, standing there again, he felt the weight of everything that had changed, not only in his life but within himself. Shaney approached from behind, her footsteps soft against the pavement. She paused beside him without speaking, letting the quiet of the river fill the space between them. "It still feels peaceful here," she said at last. "It does," he replied, glancing toward her. "Some things don't need to change." They walked slowly along the railing, memories rising gently without overwhelming the present. The city noise felt distant, leaving only the sound of water moving steadily forward. "You used to come here when things felt too fast," she added, her voice thoughtful. "I still do," he said. "But now it's different. I'm not trying to escape anything anymore." They stopped near a familiar spot where they once shared a quiet conversation years ago. Lincoln turned slightly toward her, taking a moment before speaking. "I spent a long time believing love would slow me down," he said quietly. "I thought ambition needed distance from anything emotional." Shaney listened without interrupting. But lately, he continued, "I've realized something else. Love doesn't stop progress. It gives it direction. It reminds you why you're building anything at all." His words carried calm honesty rather than urgency. The man who once measured everything through strategy now spoke with a clarity shaped by experience. "I'm not the same person who walked away from that cafe," he added. "I don't want to repeat that mistake." The river moved steadily beside them, reflecting a sky turning softer with evening light. Shaney smiled gently, studying him with quiet understanding. "And I'm not the same person who stood there hoping you'd change your mind," she said. Her tone held warmth rather than hesitation. "We've both grown," she continued. "You learned to slow down. I learned to stand on my own without waiting for anyone's approval." Lincoln nodded, appreciating the balance in her words. Their connection no longer relied on what they once had. It rested on who they had become. "I used to think people never really changed," she admitted. "But watching you rebuild, not just your company but yourself, made me reconsider that." He laughed softly. and watching you lead with confidence reminded me that strength can look quiet." They shared a brief glance that carried more meaning than any long explanation. The sky darkened slightly as lights along the river began to glow. Lincoln reached out slowly, offering his hand, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a simple invitation. "I don't expect anything to be the way it was before," he said, "but I want to build something real from here forward, something honest." Shani hesitated for a moment, not from doubt but from careful thought. Then she placed her hand in his, her expression calm. "Honesty is the only way I'd ever consider starting again," she replied. They stood side by side, hands lightly joined, watching the water move past them. "No rushing," she added gently. "No pretending we're perfect." He smiled. Agreed. The decision felt quiet and grounded, not driven by dramatic promises but by shared understanding. They weren't returning to the past, they were creating something new, shaped by lessons learned along the way. As they continued walking along the river, conversation shifted to simple things, upcoming projects, places they wanted to visit, ideas for the future that felt less about ambition and more about meaning. The city lights reflected across the water, echoing earlier memories yet carrying a different feeling now. This second chance wasn't built on expectation or pressure. It grew from patience, honesty, and the willingness to move forward together, step by step, guided not by fear of loss, but by the clarity they had both gained through time. Years later, the small neighborhood bookstore that once held quiet conversations between shelves stood transformed into something larger than either of them had imagined. The familiar wooden door remained, the soft bell still chiming whenever someone stepped inside, but the interior had evolved into a creative hub filled with warm light and thoughtful design. Shelves lined the walls, now mixed with open spaces for workshops, art displays, and community gatherings. Tables held notebooks and sketchpads instead of only novels, inviting visitors to share ideas rather than simply browse. The place carried the same calm atmosphere it always had, only now it felt alive with possibility. Shani moved through the room, greeting attendees with an easy confidence. Her design agency had grown into a platform that encouraged people to tell their own stories, and the renovated bookstore became the heart of that vision. Lincoln paused near the entrance, taking in the scene quietly. The space reflected everything she had once spoken about: creativity, connection, and the courage to build something meaningful from small beginnings. "You kept the window seat," he said softly when she joined him. She smiled. "Some things are worth holding on to." As the workshop began, participants gathered around a long table, notebooks open and expressions curious. Shani stood at the front, her presence calm yet engaging. "Every story starts with a moment of change," she told them. "Not always loud, not always dramatic. Sometimes just a decision that shifts how you see yourself." Her words carried the same warmth Lincoln remembered from years ago, now strengthened by experience. She moved between groups, offering gentle encouragement and thoughtful questions that helped people shape their ideas into something real. One attendee hesitated before speaking. "What if your story feels unfinished?" Shani considered the question before replying. "Most meaningful stories are. Growth doesn't happen all at once. It happens over time." Lincoln watched from the back of the room, leaning lightly against a bookshelf. Seeing her lead with confidence filled him with quiet pride. She no longer stood in the background of someone else's world. She had created a space entirely her own. From his place near the shelves, Lincoln noticed the details others might overlook. The way she listened carefully, the way participants relaxed when she spoke, the subtle laughter that filled the room. The bookstore felt warmer than any boardroom he had ever entered. One of the students approached him during a short break. "Are you part of the program too?" the young man asked. Lincoln smiled slightly. "I'm just here to learn." It was the truth. Watching Shani guide others reminded him that success could look different from what he once believed. It wasn't always about expansion or recognition. Sometimes it was about helping someone else discover their voice. When the session ended, participants lingered, discussing ideas and exchanging contact information. The energy felt genuine, built on curiosity rather than expectation. Shani joined him near the window afterward. "You've been quiet," she said playfully. "I like seeing this side of your world," he replied. "It feels real." She nudged him lightly. "That's the goal." Later that evening, as the bookstore emptied, Lincoln and Shani stood by the window watching the city settle into night. The space around them felt calm, carrying echoes of the past without being defined by it. "You used to think karma was something dramatic," she said, glancing at him. "I did," he admitted. "I thought it meant consequences arriving all at once. And now?" she asked. He paused, considering. "Now I think it's quieter than that. It's clarity. It's understanding why certain moments mattered more than we realized at the time." She nodded slowly. Growth rarely announces itself loudly. Lincoln looked around the room, the shelves, the creative energy, the life they had both built in different ways before finding their way back to each other. I used to believe success meant moving faster than everyone else, he said. But standing here, I feel like real success is knowing where you belong. She rested her hand lightly on his arm, and knowing who you want beside you when you get there. The words carried a calm certainty that didn't need grand emphasis. Their story hadn't been about winning or losing. It had been about learning, about understanding that choices shape us, and that growth often arrives through moments we once wished to avoid. As the lights dimmed and the bookstore prepared to close for the evening, Lincoln turned the sign on the door from "Open to see you soon." Outside, Ashford continued moving with its usual rhythm, yet inside the space felt timeless, a reminder that some stories don't end when one chapter closes. Before we leave their journey here, take a moment to think about your own path. What lessons have shaped you the most? Was it a decision that changed everything, or a quiet realization that helped you grow? If this story made you reflect on your own experiences, subscribe and share your thoughts below to stay connected. Your comments, likes, and support help keep meaningful stories alive. Stories about growth, humility, and the kind of second chances that arrive when we're finally ready to understand them. Because in a city that never stopped moving, two people who once walked away from each other found their way back, not to repeat the past, but to build something honest, steady, and real. And sometimes that's what karma truly is, not punishment, not luck, but the clarity that guides us toward the life we were meant to create.